The gun was 3 feet away, pointed directly at Bumpy Johnson's chest. The finger was already on the trigger. This should have been the end. The moment Harlem's most powerful gangster finally met his match. But Bumpy didn't flinch, didn't reach for a weapon, didn't try to run. Instead, he said 6 words. Just 6. And the room froze. The gunman's hand started shaking. Other mobsters looked at each other, confused, terrified, because those 6 words weren't a threat, weren't a plea. They were something far more dangerous. They were truth. A truth so devastating that it turned an execution into a negotiation, a death sentence into a strategic victory. What Bumpy said that day became legend, whispered in social clubs, repeated in prison yards, studied by every gangster who wanted to understand real power. This is the story of how 6 words saved Bumpy Johnson's life and destroyed the man who tried to take it. New York in 1958 was a powder keg. The Italian mob families were consolidating power. The Genovese family had just eliminated rivals in the Appalachian meeting fallout. Frank Costello had survived an assassination attempt. And across the city, old alliances were crumbling. Into this chaos stepped a new player. Vincent, Vinnie the Blade, Esposito. He wasn't a boss, wasn't even a captain yet, but he was ambitious, ruthless, and convinced he could make his name by doing what others feared, killing Bumpy Johnson. Vinnie had grown up in Little Italy, learned the life from his father, a Genovese soldier. By 32, he'd earned his reputation through violence. Quick with a knife, even quicker with a gun. He'd handled problems for the family, made people disappear, collected debts that others couldn't. And now he wanted more. Wanted to be a made man. Wanted respect that came from accomplishing the impossible. Bumpy Johnson was the impossible. By 1958, Bumpy had ruled Harlem for nearly 3 decades. He'd survived wars with Dutch Schultz, outlasted Lucky Luciano's attempts to control his territory, built partnerships with the 5 families based on mutual respect, and carefully maintained boundaries. He was untouchable, not because of violence, but because killing him would create more problems than it solved. Harlem would erupt. The fragile peace between black and Italian organized crime would shatter. And whoever ordered the hit would face retaliation from unexpected corners. But Vinnie didn't care about politics, about consequences, about the delicate balance that kept New York's underworld functioning. He saw Bumpy as a target, an opportunity, a stepping stone to power. The beef started small, a numbers runner in East Harlem, territory that technically fell under Genovese control but had been operated by one of Bumpy's associates for years. Vinnie decided to take it back. Violently, he sent 3 men to collect the weekly take. They beat the runner, destroyed his operation, left a message: this territory belongs to the Italians now. Bumpy heard about it within hours. His network was too extensive for anything to stay hidden long. He sent word back, polite, professional, suggesting a meeting to resolve the territorial dispute. Vinnie's response was delivered through an intermediary. Tell Bumpy Johnson his time is over. Tell him Harlem belongs to us now. Tell him if he has a problem with that, I'll handle it personally. It was disrespectful, dangerous, and exactly the kind of public challenge that couldn't be ignored. Because in the underworld, letting someone disrespect you meant inviting everyone else to do the same. Bumpy could have responded with violence, could have sent his own soldiers to eliminate Vinnie, could have started a war. Instead, he did something unexpected. He agreed to meet, face to face. No backup, no weapons. Just a conversation between 2 men who understood that words, sometimes, were more dangerous than bullets. The meeting was set for a Tuesday night. A social club in the Bronx. Neutral territory, or so everyone thought. The social club sat on Arthur Avenue. Italian neighborhood. Family restaurants. Bakeries that smelled like fresh bread at 5 in the morning. This was Genovese territory through and through. Walking in alone was either courage or suicide. Bumpy chose courage. He arrived at 9 o'clock, dressed in an expensive suit. No weapon visible. His car was parked 2 blocks away. No driver waiting. No backup positioned on rooftops. Just Bumpy Johnson walking into a room full of men who wanted him dead. The club's interior was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood paneling. Photographs of Italy on the walls. A bar along one side. Tables scattered throughout. And in the back corner, Vinnie Esposito, surrounded by 6 of his crew. All armed. All watching the door. When Bumpy entered, conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward him. Some with curiosity. others with hatred, a few with something close to respect. Because walking into this situation took a particular kind of nerve. Vinnie stood, gestured to an empty chair across from him. Bumpy Johnson, heard a lot about you. Glad you could make it. His voice carried mock courtesy, like a cat playing with a mouse before the kill. Bumpy sat down, calm, unhurried. He looked around the room, noted exits, counted men, assessed threats, all in the 3 seconds it took to settle into his chair. You wanted to talk, Bumpy said. So talk. Vinnie smiled, leaned back, enjoyed the moment. This was his stage, his territory, his play. Here's how this works. East Harlem, that's ours now. The numbers, the gambling, all of it. You can keep your little piece of Central Harlem. Run your clubs, do your thing. But the expansion stops. The partnership with our family, that's over. You work for us now, or you don't work at all. It was an ultimatum, delivered with absolute confidence. Vinnie expected anger, expected negotiation, expected Bumpy to either submit or make threats that would justify what came next. Bumpy did neither. He just sat there, waiting, letting the silence stretch. It made Vinnie uncomfortable, made his crew shift in their seats. Because silence in these situations usually meant someone was planning violence. You got nothing to say? Vinnie asked. His voice had an edge now, less confident. Bumpy looked at him, really looked at him. Not with anger, not with fear, with something closer to pity. You're young, Bumpy said quietly. You don't understand how this works yet. So I'm going to explain it once. Just once. What happens after that is on you. The room tensed. Hands moved closer to weapons. Vinnie's smile disappeared. You threatening me? In my own club? Surrounded by my men? Bumpy shook his head. No threat. Just facts. You think taking East Harlem makes you powerful. It doesn't. It makes you visible. And visibility, in our world, is dangerous. He leaned forward slightly. His voice remained calm, conversational, like he was explaining basic mathematics to a child. The families tolerate me because I'm useful. I keep Harlem stable. I prevent conflicts. I make everyone money without creating problems. You're creating problems. And when you create problems for the families, they solve those problems. Permanently. Vinnie laughed. But it sounded forced. Hollow. The families approved this. You think I'd move without permission? No, Bumpy said. I think someone gave you enough rope to hang yourself. And you're too stupid to see it. That changed the atmosphere completely. Now it wasn't a negotiation. It was an insult. A challenge to Vinnie's intelligence. To his judgment. To everything he thought he knew about the game. Vinnie stood. His hand moved to his jacket. To the gun everyone knew was there. You got a lot of nerve. Coming in here. Talking to me like I'm some nobody. Like I haven't put in work. Like I haven't earned my place. Bumpy remained seated. Didn't move. Didn't react. Just watched Vinnie's hand move toward the weapon. Go ahead, Bumpy said. Pull it out. Shoot me right here. In front of all these witnesses. In a social club that has your family's name attached to it. See what happens next. Vinnie's hand stopped. Because he was starting to understand. Starting to see the trap. Killing Bumpy here would bring heat. Police attention. FBI interest. It would violate every rule about keeping business quiet. About not drawing attention. About operating in shadows. That's what I thought, Bumpy said. He stood now. Slowly. Maintaining eye contact. You want to be a tough guy? Want to prove yourself? Do it smart. Not like some street punk who doesn't understand consequences. He started toward the door. Every instinct told Vinnie to stop him. To not let this disrespect stand. To prove he was in control. One of his crew members, a thick-necked enforcer named Sal, stepped forward. Blocked Bumpy's path. Boss didn't say you could leave. Bumpy looked at Sal. Then back at Vinnie. This what you want? To start it here? Now. With all these witnesses. Vinnie was caught. Let Bumpy leave, he looked weak. Stop him. He risked everything Bumpy had just warned about. The room waited. Every man watching. Judging. Waiting to see which way this would go. Finally, Vinnie waved his hand. Dismissive. Trying to reclaim authority. Let him go. Old man's not worth the trouble tonight. Bumpy walked past Sal. Past the other soldiers. Out into the street. Behind him, the club erupted in conversation. Arguments about whether Vinnie had handled it right. Whether he'd looked weak. Whether Bumpy had just played him. Vinnie sat back down. Furious. Humiliated. Because in front of his crew, Bumpy had made him hesitate. Had made him think twice. Had taken control of a situation that should have been Vinnie's from the start. That couldn't stand. The insult couldn't be ignored. And within the hour, Vinnie made his decision. Bumpy Johnson had to die, not in a social club with witnesses, but soon, quietly, permanently. The hit was planned for Friday night, 3 days after the social club meeting. 3 days for Vinnie to stew in his anger, to convince himself that eliminating Bumpy was the only way to restore his reputation. He assembled his best men, not the entire crew, just 4. Professionals who'd handled wet work before. Men who understood the importance of silence, of clean executions, of leaving no evidence. The target location was one of Bumpy's regular stops, a restaurant on 135th Street. Bumpy ate there every Friday, always arrived around 10, always sat at the same table in the back, always stayed for about an hour. Predictable. That's what Vinnie was counting on. The plan was simple. 2 shooters inside, dressed as customers. They'd wait until Bumpy was seated, until he was relaxed. Then simultaneous shots, close range, multiple bullets, no chance of survival. The other 2 men would be outside, covering exits, making sure nobody interfered, making sure the shooters could escape cleanly. Vinnie wouldn't be there personally. That was smart. Maintaining distance, maintaining deniability. If something went wrong, he could claim ignorance, could say his men acted independently. But Bumpy knew the hit was coming. He always knew. His network of informants was too extensive, too deeply embedded in every organization. A bartender who overheard planning sessions, a girlfriend of one of the shooters who talked too much, a cousin of Vinnie's who owed Bumpy a favor. Information flowed to Bumpy like water flowing downhill. Naturally, inevitably, he could have avoided the restaurant, changed his routine, disappeared for a few weeks until tensions cooled. That's what most people would do. But Bumpy wasn't most people. He saw opportunity where others saw danger, saw a chance to end this conflict permanently. So Friday night, he went to the restaurant. Right on schedule. 10 o'clock. Same table. Same routine. But he wasn't alone. Jericho sat 2 tables away. Willie was at the bar. 3 more of Bumpy's men were scattered throughout the restaurant. All armed. All ready. All watching. The 2 shooters were already inside. Vinnie's men. They'd arrived at 9:30. Ordered food they barely touched. Kept their hands near their jackets, near their weapons. They were nervous. Bumpy could see it. The way they kept glancing at the door. The way they avoided eye contact with other customers. The way their legs bounced under the table. Amateurs pretending to be professionals. When Bumpy walked in, both shooters tensed. This was it. The moment they'd been waiting for. Bumpy walked past their table. Didn't look at them. Didn't acknowledge their presence. Just moved to his usual spot in the back. Sat down. Ordered his regular meal. The shooters exchanged glances, trying to decide when to move, trying to find the right moment. The restaurant was busy. Families eating. Couples on dates. Regular people who had no idea they were about to witness an execution. One of the shooters, a man named Marco, started to stand. His partner, Joey, grabbed his arm, whispered something, probably telling him to wait, to let Bumpy settle in, to make sure the angle was right. But they waited too long. Because while they were debating timing, Bumpy made his move. He stood up, walked directly toward their table. Not fast, not threatening, just casual, like he was heading to the bathroom. The shooters froze. This wasn't the plan. Bumpy was supposed to be sitting, supposed to be vulnerable, not walking toward them, not looking directly at them. Marco's hand went to his jacket. Joey did the same. But they were in public, surrounded by witnesses. Drawing weapons now would expose everything. Bumpy stopped at their table, looked down at them, smiled. You boys here for the meatballs? Best in Harlem. Marco's face went pale. Joey couldn't make eye contact. We're just eating, Marco stammered. Bumpy nodded, like he believed them. Enjoy your meal. Then he walked past, into the bathroom, left them sitting there, confused, uncertain, wondering if he knew, wondering if this was some kind of test. In the bathroom, Bumpy washed his hands, took his time, let them sweat, let them wonder. This was psychological warfare, making them question everything. When he came back out, he didn't return to his table. He walked straight to the exit, paused at the door, looked back at the shooters one more time, and winked. Then he was gone. Marco and Joey sat frozen for another 30 seconds. Then both jumped up, rushed outside. But Bumpy had disappeared. The 2 men who were supposed to be covering the exits were nowhere to be seen, because Bumpy's crew had already handled them. Not violently, just relocated, given strong suggestions to take a walk, to forget they were ever there. Marco pulled out a phone. Called Vinny. We got a problem. He made us. He fucking knew. Vinny's response was immediate. Furious. Then you should have shot him anyway. In the street. Anywhere. There were witnesses. Cops on the corner. We couldn't. I don't want excuses. Find him. Finish it. Tonight. But finding Bumpy Johnson when he didn't want to be found was impossible. He'd melted into Harlem. Into the neighborhood that protected him. That hid him. That would never give him up to outsiders. The failed hit made everything worse. Now Vinny looked incompetent. His men had been made. His plan had failed. And Bumpy had embarrassed him again. This time in front of shooters who would definitely talk. Who would spread the story. The next morning, Vinny received a message. Hand-delivered to the social club. A simple note. No threats. Just an address. And a time. 3 p.m. Vinny knew what it meant. Bumpy wanted another meeting. But this time, Vinny would be ready. This time, he'd bring enough firepower to handle anything. This time, Bumpy Johnson would die. The address was a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Abandoned. Isolated. The kind of place where screams wouldn't carry. Where bodies could disappear. Vinny arrived with 8 men. All armed. All ready for war. They surrounded the building. Covered every exit. Set up positions with clear lines of fire. This time, there would be no escape. No psychological games. Just overwhelming force. Vinny entered through the main door. Gun drawn. For men behind him. The warehouse was dark. Empty. Just shadows and the smell of old machinery. Then a light clicked on. Single bulb hanging from the ceiling. And there, standing in the center of the space, was Bumpy Johnson. Alone. Unarmed. Hands at his sides. Like he was waiting for a bus instead of facing 8 guns. Vinny smiled. Finally. Finally. He had Bumpy exactly where he wanted him. You made a mistake coming here, Vinny said. His voice echoed in the empty space. Bumpy didn't respond. Just looked at Vinny. Calm. Almost bored. Nothing to say now. Vinny continued. No more smart remarks. No more threats. He raised his gun. Pointed it directly at Bumpy's chest. His men did the same. 8 weapons. All aimed at one man. All ready to fire. This is how it ends, Vinny said. You. Dead in a warehouse. Nobody will find you for weeks. And I'll take over Harlem. All of it. Your territory. Your operations. Everything you built. Bumpy finally spoke. His voice was quiet. Conversational. Like they were discussing the weather. You think killing me gives you Harlem? Vinny's finger tightened on the trigger. I think killing you removes the only obstacle. Then you're stupider than I thought. The insult hung in the air. Even now. Even facing death. Bumpy couldn't help himself. Vinny's face flushed red. Last words from a dead man. Hope they were worth it. I got 6 more, Bumpy said. And then he spoke them. 6 words that changed everything. Your boss already knows you're here. Silence. Complete. Total. Crushing. Vinny's hand wavered. What? Frank Costello, Bumpy said. Calm. Patient. Like a teacher explaining a simple concept. He knows about this meeting. Knows you're planning to kill me. Knows you've been operating without permission. Making moves that bring heat. That threaten the family's operations. Vinny shook his head. You're lying. Trying to save yourself. Bumpy smiled. Am I? Then why is there a car outside with 2 of Costello's men in it? Why have they been following you since you left the social club? Why do they have cameras? Recording everything. One of Vinny's soldiers, the one positioned at the door, called out. Boss. There's a black sedan. 2 guys inside. They're just watching. Vinny's world started crumbling. Because if Bumpy was telling the truth, if Costello knew, if this was all being documented, then this wasn't an execution. It was a setup. You played me, Vinny whispered. From the beginning. Bumpy nodded. The social club meeting. You thought I walked in alone. I didn't. Costello's people were already watching. Recording your threats. Documenting your lack of respect for the established order. He took a step forward. Vinny's gun was still pointed at him. But now it shook. The failed hit at the restaurant. You think that was luck? I made sure your men saw me. Made sure they failed. Made sure the story spread. Made you look incompetent. Another step. And now this. You. In a warehouse. With 8 men. Planning to murder someone the families have a treaty with. Someone who's been approved by the commission. Someone whose death would cause problems nobody wants. Vinny's mind raced. Trying to find a way out. Trying to understand how he'd been outmaneuvered so completely. If I shoot you now, he said, Costello's men can't stop it. You're still dead. Bumpy stopped walking. 3 feet away from Vinny's gun. True. You can kill me. Right now? Pull that trigger. But the moment you do, those men outside call in. And you, your crew, your family, everyone you've ever known, they all become targets. The commission doesn't forgive unauthorized hits, especially ones this sloppy, this public. The warehouse was silent except for breathing. Heavy, nervous, uncertain. Vinny's men looked at each other, at their boss, at Bumpy, trying to decide what happened next. So here's your choice, Bumpy said. His voice was soft, but it carried absolute authority. You can shoot me. Start a war you can't win. Bring down heat that destroys everything. Or, you can lower that gun, walk away, and pray that Costello is feeling merciful when he hears about this. Vinny's hand shook harder. The gun felt impossibly heavy. Because he finally understood. This was never about territory. Never about respect. This was about demonstrating the difference between a gangster and a strategist. Between someone who used violence and someone who used intelligence. Bumpy had orchestrated everything. The social club meeting. The restaurant hit. This warehouse confrontation. All of it designed to expose Vinny. To prove he was reckless. Dangerous. A liability. And now Vinny had to make the choice that would define the rest of his life. Shoot and die. Or lower the gun and accept defeat. The gun lowered. Slowly. Like gravity was pulling it down against Vinny's will. His hand dropped to his side. The weapon hanging useless. Defeated. Around him, his men did the same. Because if the boss wasn't shooting, they weren't either. Because survival meant knowing when to fold. Bumpy watched this happen without expression. No triumph. No gloating. Just quiet acknowledgement that the game had played out exactly as he'd planned. Smart choice, Bumpy said. He walked past Vinny. Past the 8 men who'd come to kill him. Headed toward the door. Stopped. Turned back. One more thing. You're done in New York. Costello's already made that decision. You got 48 hours to leave. Go to Florida. California. Anywhere but here. If you're still in the city Sunday morning, you won't see Monday. Vinny's voice was hollow. Broken. All this. The setup. The games. Just to run me out of town. Bumpy shook his head. Not just you. Everyone like you. Every young hothead who thinks violence makes them powerful. Every idiot who confuses aggression with strategy. You were an example. A lesson. And trust me, people will remember it. He walked out. Into the fading afternoon light. The black sedan Bumpy had mentioned was real. 2 men inside. Watching. Recording. They nodded to Bumpy as he passed. Respect between professionals. Inside the warehouse, Vinny collapsed into a chair. His men stood around him, waiting for orders. For direction. For some indication of what happened next. One of them, Sal, spoke quietly. Boss, what do we do? Vinny didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because everything he'd built, everything he'd planned, every ambition he'd carried, it was gone. Destroyed by 6 words and the intelligence to back them up. By Saturday afternoon, Vinny Esposito was on a train to Miami, carrying 1 suitcase. No crew, no reputation, just the memory of how completely he'd been played. The story spread through New York's underworld like wildfire. Bumpy Johnson had faced down an assassination attempt, had turned the tables so completely that the would-be killer fled the city, had done it without firing a shot, without spilling blood, just with information, strategy, and 6 perfectly chosen words. Frank Costello called Bumpy 2 days later. The conversation was brief. Heard about the Vinny situation, Costello said. Handled well. Professional. He was a problem, Bumpy replied. For both of us. True. Kid didn't understand the rules. Thought muscle was enough. You taught him different. There was a pause. Then Costello continued. The families appreciate how you handled this. No bodies. No heat. No complications. That's the kind of thinking we respect. It was more than approval. It was acknowledgement. From one of the most powerful mob bosses in America. That Bumpy Johnson operated at their level. That he deserved the respect he'd always demanded. In Harlem, the reaction was celebration. Not public. Not obvious. But in barbershops and clubs and corner conversations, people talked about how Bumpy had outsmarted another challenger. How he'd proven again that intelligence trumped violence. How he'd protected his territory without starting a war. The younger generation took notes. Studied the moves. Understood that real power came from thinking 3 steps ahead. From turning your enemy's aggression against them. From being so prepared that when they made their move, you'd already won. The restaurant on 135th Street put up a small plaque. Unofficial. Unauthorized. Just a brass plate near Bumpy's usual table. It read, "Reserved." Everyone knew what it meant. Nobody else sat there. Ever. The warehouse in Red Hook became legendary. People would point to it. Tell the story. About the day Bumpy Johnson walked into an execution and walked out alive. About 6 words that saved a life and ended a career. But the real impact was subtler, more profound. Because after Vinnie, the challenges stopped. Young mobsters thought twice before testing Bumpy. Before assuming they could take what he'd built. Before confusing his patience with weakness. They'd learned what Vinnie learned too late. That Bumpy Johnson didn't just play the game. He wrote the rules. And anyone stupid enough to challenge him would find themselves checkmated before they even understood they were playing. The gun that had been pointed at Bumpy's chest. The finger on the trigger. The moment that should have been his death. It became instead his greatest victory. Not because he survived, but because of how he survived. With intelligence. With preparation. With 6 words that demonstrated he knew everything. Controlled everything. Had orchestrated the entire situation from the beginning. Your boss already knows you're here. 6 words. That's all it took. To turn an execution into a surrender. To transform certain death into absolute victory. To prove once again that Bumpy Johnson was exactly what Harlem had always known him to be. Untouchable. The weeks following Vinnie's departure brought unexpected peace. The Genovese family installed new leadership in their East Harlem operations. Men who understood diplomacy. Who respected boundaries. Who'd learned from Vinnie's mistakes. The territories that had been disputed were quietly redistributed. Bumpy got back what was his. The Italians kept what they'd always controlled. No conflict. No drama. Just professionals conducting business. Frank Costello invited Bumpy to a private dinner. Just the two of them. At a restaurant in Midtown that most people couldn't get reservations at for months. They talked about the old days. About Lucky Luciano. About how the underworld had changed. About the importance of thinking beyond immediate gratification. You could have killed him, Costello said over wine. Vinnie could have had him hit after the social club meeting. Would have been justified. Bumpy shrugged. Killing him would have created a martyr. Made him seem important. This way, he's just a cautionary tale. A lesson about what happens when you don't think things through. Costello nodded. Appreciative. That's why you've lasted so long. You understand consequences. Long-term thinking. Most guys in our line of work, they only see the next move. You see the whole board. It was the highest compliment one strategist could give another. Recognition between masters. The partnership between Bumpy and the Italian families deepened. What had been tolerance became genuine cooperation. Information sharing. Coordinated operations. Mutual protection. The invisible borders that had defined New York's underworld became more solid. More respected. Because everyone had seen what happened when someone violated them. The story of the 6 words became legend. But like all legends, it grew in the telling. Some versions claimed Bumpy had 100 men hidden in the warehouse. Others said the FBI was involved. A few insisted that Vinnie had actually been shot, but survived. The truth was simpler. More elegant. Bumpy had used information as a weapon. Had understood his enemy better than the enemy understood himself. Had prepared so thoroughly that when the moment came, victory was inevitable. Young gangsters across New York studied the incident. Tried to understand the lesson. Some got it. Realized that intelligence and preparation mattered more than firepower. Others missed the point entirely. Focused on the 6 words themselves. As if the specific phrase was magic. As if repeating it would grant them Bumpy's power. But the words weren't magic. They were proof. Proof that Bumpy had done his homework. Had built relationships. Had positioned pieces on the board so carefully that when the attack came, he'd already won. In Harlem, life continued. The numbers racket flourished. The clubs thrived. Bumpy's empire grew not through conquest, but through competence. Through being so reliable, so professional, so valuable that everyone wanted to work with him rather than against him. He mentored the next generation differently after Vinnie. Emphasized strategy over strength. Information over intimidation. The ability to see 3 moves ahead. Nicky Barnes listened. Absorbed the lessons. Would eventually build his own empire using similar principles. Frank Lucas heard the stories, but focused on the wrong parts. On the appearance of power rather than the substance. Would eventually pay the price for that misunderstanding. But that was years away. For now, Bumpy's position was stronger than ever. Not because he'd eliminated a threat, but because of how he'd eliminated it. The FBI noticed. Agent Thomas Garrett added pages to Bumpy's file. Notes about the Vinnie situation. About how Bumpy had outmaneuvered a would-be assassin without breaking a single law. It frustrated Garrett. Made his job harder. Because you couldn't arrest someone for being smart. For using legal means to achieve illegal ends. The best the Bureau could do was watch. Wait. Hope Bumpy made a mistake. He never did. By 1960, 2 years after the warehouse confrontation, Bumpy Johnson had become an institution. Not just in Harlem. Across the entire criminal underworld. People spoke his name with respect. Sometimes with fear. Always with acknowledgement that he operated on a different level. The warehouse in Red Hook was eventually torn down. Replaced by condos. But old-timers still pointed to the spot. Still told the story. About the day someone tried to kill Bumpy Johnson and discovered that some men can't be killed. Not because they're invincible, but because they're indispensable. And Vinnie Esposito? He opened a restaurant in Miami. Legitimate business. No mob ties. No criminal operations. Just a quiet life far from New York. Far from the world that had chewed him up and spit him out. Sometimes he'd watch the news. See stories about organized crime. About the FBI's war on the Mafia. And he'd remember the warehouse. Remember the gun in his hand. Remember the moment when 6 words changed everything. He never spoke about it. Never told the story. Just carried it silently. A reminder of the day he learned the difference between being dangerous and being powerful. The legacy of those 6 words extended far beyond one failed assassination. They became a teaching tool. A parable repeated in social clubs and prison yards across America. The story wasn't just about Bumpy Johnson surviving. It was about the evolution of organized crime itself. About how the game was changing from pure violence to sophisticated strategy. In the 1960s, as the civil rights movement transformed America, Bumpy's methods took on additional significance. Young black activists saw parallels, not in the criminality, but in the approach, using intelligence to overcome superior force, turning an opponent's strength into weakness, refusing to accept the limitations others imposed. Malcolm X understood this. He and Bumpy had mutual respect, different paths, different goals, but similar understanding that power came from preparation, from knowing your enemy better than they knew themselves. When Malcolm spoke about self-defense and strategic thinking, some of those ideas had roots in conversations with men like Bumpy. The Italian mob families continued their relationship with Bumpy until his death in 1968. Heart attack. Sudden. On a Harlem street he'd walked 1,000 times. He was 62. The funeral was massive. Hundreds attended. Musicians, businessmen, politicians who publicly condemned him but privately acknowledged his importance. And mobsters. From every family, every organization, paying respects to a man who'd changed the game. Frank Costello sent the largest flower arrangement. The card simply read, "To a worthy opponent and valuable ally." It was buried with Bumpy. No one else needed to see it. The 6 words were never forgotten. They were quoted in books about organized crime, referenced in documentaries, studied by law enforcement trying to understand criminal psychology. Because those words represented something fundamental about power. Real power wasn't about who had the most guns, the most soldiers, the most willingness to use violence. Real power was about who had the most information, the best preparation, the clearest understanding of consequences. Bumpy had demonstrated that a black gangster from Harlem could outthink Italian mob bosses, could survive assassination attempts through intelligence rather than firepower, could build an empire that lasted decades by being smarter than everyone else. The warehouse confrontation became the definitive Bumpy Johnson story, more famous than his wars with Dutch Schultz, more significant than his partnerships with the 5 families, because it distilled everything he represented into one perfect moment. A gun pointed at his chest, death 3 seconds away, and 6 words that reversed everything. Decades later, the story still resonates. In a world where violence is often glorified, where strength is confused with aggression, where young people think power comes from intimidation, the story of Bumpy and Vinnie offers a different lesson. It shows that intelligence defeats violence, that preparation trumps aggression, that understanding consequences separates professionals from amateurs. New York's underworld changed after Bumpy. The racial barriers he'd challenged continued to erode. Black organized crime became more sophisticated, more integrated with other criminal enterprises. The blueprint Bumpy created was followed by others, some successfully, others not. But all of them understood they were building on foundations he'd laid. The social club where Bumpy first confronted Vinnie closed in the 1970s, became a grocery store, then a pharmacy. The current owners have no idea about the history, about the confrontation that happened within those walls. But the old-timers remember, and they still tell the story. The restaurant on 135th Street where the hit was supposed to happen is still operating. Different owners, different menu. But locals know the history, know which table was Bumpy's, know what almost happened there. Some tourists ask about it, want to sit where history occurred. The owners smile, accommodate them, charge a little extra. History has value. And in Harlem, Bumpy's name still carries weight. Not because of the violence he committed, not because of the empire he built, but because of moments like the warehouse. Moments when he proved that a black man could be smarter, more strategic, more successful than anyone expected, could survive in a world designed to destroy him, could thrive using intelligence as his primary weapon. The 6 words themselves have been analyzed endlessly. Your boss already knows you're here. Simple, direct, devastating. They worked because Bumpy had done the preparation, had built the relationships, had positioned the pieces perfectly. The words weren't magic. They were the final move in a chess game Bumpy had been playing since the moment Vinnie first challenged him. Everything that came before, the social club meeting, the failed restaurant hit, the warehouse setup, all of it was designed to reach that moment. That choice, that realization for Vinnie that he'd been outplayed from the beginning. This is how legends are born, not from the biggest crimes or the most violence, but from moments of pure intelligence, pure strategy, pure demonstration that some people operate on a level others can't comprehend. Bumpy Johnson was one of those people, and the 6 words that saved his life became his immortality. A reminder that in a world of guns and violence, the most dangerous weapon is still the human mind, properly prepared, thoroughly informed, absolutely ruthless in its application. Your boss already knows you're here. 6 words. That's all it took. To turn death into victory. To transform a moment of vulnerability into a demonstration of absolute power. To prove once and for all that Bumpy Johnson was exactly what Harlem always knew him to be. A master strategist who played the game at a level his enemies couldn't even see.